Hello, this is Augie Macro with Cryptid Creatures. Today we're going to not talk about a cryptid in particular, but we're going to talk about 4 of the many museums that celebrate these amazing creatures. The first museum we went to was the International Cryptozoology Museum in Portland, Maine. Here we are at the International Cryptozoology Museum in Portland, Maine, where I had the honor to interview Loren Coleman, the director and founder of the museum. So what first got you interested in cryptids?
Well, I became interested in March of 1960 when I saw a science fiction film called Half Human, Japanese science fiction film. And it was about these Yetis in mountains of Asia. I've been reading all kinds of natural history books. I'd never heard of those. So I went to school and my teachers gave me, I said, what is this about these Yetis, abominable snowmen? And they said, they don't exist, get back to your studies, leave me alone. So that made me really curious, and I just started going to the local library, getting books, writing everybody in those books and finding out more and more, gathering articles and then doing investigations.
Have you ever had any sightings before?
I've had some ear sightings where I've heard different screeches and different things in the woods. I think the best focused sighting that I can talk about is in Southern Illinois in 1969. I was riding with a bunch of coworkers back home, and across the road, a black panther went, from one side to the other, and there was 5 other people in the car, and I couldn't convince them to turn around and look for prints and stuff. They all just wanted to go home and relax. So it put me in a situation where it happens with a lot of eyewitnesses. It's a very brief encounter, and nobody follows up on it. So, it was a great sighting, really.
What is your favorite exhibit in the museum?
Well, because I was first interested in Yetis, my first love will always be Yetis. So within the museum, right down that way, is the Yeti hair samples that Tom Slick and Sir Edmund Hillary actually found. And when I was able to get those, and it goes right with the flag of the Hillary expedition, which was from 1960. So those combination of items may look minor to people going through the museum, but they're my favorite. Cryptozoology is a real living science. So every day there's new reports of new creatures, new animals discovered. This museum uses as its logo the coelacanth. And the coelacanth were discovered in 1938, hadn't been seen for 65 million years. And so that's a really appealing animal for me, as is the okapi, which was discovered in 1901. And those first animals that were cryptozoological and then they were discovered become part of zoology. I use them in a lot of my lectures because it stimulates some people to then look deeper into some of those animals.
What's the mission of the museum?
Mission of the museum is to educate and really sponsor different expeditions. It's to really look for the hidden or unknown animals and present the evidence. I've been collecting this material since 1960. So it's now over 60 years of material that used to all fit in my home, and it's grown since that time. So as you can probably see, this is not something you'd want to keep in your house anymore. And so part of the museum is it's no longer mine. It became a nonprofit organization that will be my legacy, and it's a way to preserve it all.
If you were to give advice to someone going into cryptozoology, what would it be?
Do you know anybody like that?
No, not really.
You?
Yeah, other than me, no.
It's a trick question. I think study, stay in school, really make as many contacts as you can and do field expeditions and write it down some way, document it. I know you're doing that with film, but I was just talking to somebody who was going to do a lecture on Southern Illinois cryptids, and he had a whole bunch of different advice for people that were going to go out in the field. And the one that I always like to really emphasize, and it kind of is a measure of how specific you can get with advice like you're asking me, is that always put a scale. You know, like if you're going to put see a footprint or a piece of evidence, put something in the picture that you can measure it by. With regard to yourself and looking at it, I was little once, and I was a young cryptozoologist, and I always felt that I was standing on the shoulders of other cryptozoologists, of other naturalists. But I never thought less of myself. So as you're putting and looking at other cryptozoologists, never measure yourself by them. Never use them as the scale. Use yourself and think about how great you can be, how much you can produce, and what you can do to discover new animals and change the world.
Thanks.
Sure. Thank you. It's nice to meet you.
In September of 1952, there were sightings of a supposed alien creature known as the Flatwoods Monster in Flatwoods, West Virginia, in the center of the state. The Flatwoods Monster Museum is in Sutton, West Virginia, and we went there to learn more about it. Here we are in the small town of Sutton, West Virginia, where we had the opportunity to sit down and talk with Andrew Smith, the executive director of the Braxton County Visitors Center, which contains the Flatwoods Monster Museum. What first got you into making this museum?
Well, I work for the Braxton County Convention and Visitors Bureau, and for the 5 or 6 years preceding the creation of the Flatwoods Monster Museum, one thing that I noticed a lot were people traveling to the area and wanting someplace to go that had to do with the Flatwoods Monster, or just more to do that had to do with it, you know, that sort of thing. And in 2018, we were looking for a new location to house our offices, and my board of directors wanted to have a visitor center somewhere on a main street in Braxton County. And when we were looking at this building, there was so much space that I asked my board, I said, hey, instead of just having a visitor center, could we also develop a Flatwoods Monster Museum? Which really developed out of a small display area that we had in our previous office location. So we kind of already had a good start, but once we set up here, we were able to really expand and get a lot more, you know, things on file, a lot more things to display. But that was the main thing, is really we just looked at a building that had too much space for a visitor center, so we developed a Flatwoods Monster Museum.
When was the last recorded sighting of the Flatwoods Monster?
Well, that's kind of debatable, but in the purest sense of the Flatwoods Monster, at least in my mind, there was really only one and true, sighting, and that was the September 12th case in 1952. However, there is another supposed encounter that took place just about, probably 10 miles south of Flatwoods, that supposedly took place on September 13th, 1952. The account is definitely similar to the original count on the 12th, but that account wasn't reported until 3 years later in 1955. And there was only ever the one reporting. The witnesses weren't ever able to be contacted again, or at least for anything official. So, you know, the validity of the story could be somewhat dubious, not necessarily. According to the witnesses, it was somewhere on Route 4 along the Elk River between the town of Clay and the town of Sutton.
So is there any evidence that supports any of the claims of the Flatwoods Monster?
As far as physical evidence, no. As far as I know, it's almost all anecdotal or witness evidence. However, there was a group sent out from the Army from a nearby base, and were asked to come and basically check things out, and if they found anything, to send it back to Washington, D.C., to the Pentagon to examine. So if they found anything, we wouldn't know about it, and I don't think anybody would know. I'm assuming it would be a classified file. But as far as I know, nothing was recovered.
Do you have any theories of why the Flatwoods Monster came here?
If the Flatwoods Monster was an alien, and if it was in a UFO, I would imagine maybe if it was having some sort of, some sort of flight difficulties, which I think has been theorized, before, that it was possibly maybe even shot down, that maybe from the sky at that time, maybe Flatwoods would have looked like a nice, dark, secluded patch where you could sit down and, could be left alone, or maybe no one would see you, or if you were again, supposing, but if you were getting fired on, maybe thought, well, maybe the bullets aren't coming from that dark patch, so sit down there. I don't know what goes through an alien's head. If you're interested in the Flatwoods Monster Museum or the Flatwoods Monster story at all, and we're interested in learning more, I would encourage you or your viewers to visit braxtonwv.org, or if you actually put in braxie.com, BRAXXIE.com. That takes you right to the section of our website that has to do with the Flatwoods Monster. So there you can find info about the museum, about the story itself, about the Flatwoods Monster chairs, but that's just basically anything in the area that has anything to do with the Flatwoods Monster. You can find it there.
Has the Braxie cat reported any sightings of any strange happenings?
No. I'm trying to think of pretty much if it doesn't involve cat snacks or someone petting her, she's not interested. So she's sleeping. Unless someone touches her belly, sometimes that makes her upset. Or you should see, I would imagine the look on the witness's face when they saw the Flatwoods Monster might closely resemble the way Braxie Cat looks when she runs out the front door and then realizes she's right beside a road with a bunch of cars going up and down it. She gets pretty scared. But otherwise, no, the cat's pretty laid back. It doesn't have a lot to worry about.
Thank you for interviewing.
Yep, you're very welcome. Thank you for having me. I appreciate it.
In our travels, we also went to the Expedition Bigfoot Sasquatch Museum in Blue Ridge, Georgia, which houses a treasure trove of Bigfoot paraphernalia and evidence. Here we are in the small town of Blue Ridge, Georgia at the Expedition Bigfoot Sasquatch Museum, where we had the opportunity to interview David Bakara, the founder of the museum.
My name's David Bakara, and I live up here in Blue Ridge, Georgia, and we opened up this museum, Expedition Bigfoot, the Sasquatch Museum, in 2016, so we're starting our 6th year.
So what's the mission of the museum?
The museum is to kind of introduce some folks that don't think Bigfoot is real or have never heard of Bigfoot, kind of introduce them to the subject matter in an entertaining format.
And what is your theory about Bigfoot?
My theory has changed considerably since I was 12, thinking I was looking for a big ape, and then after I've interviewed hundreds of witnesses, and it's now that it's something else. I can't tell you what it is, I'm not sure what it is, but it's not just a big, rare ape, it's something else. We're getting ready to open another museum, a larger museum. We're collecting artifacts for it now. But I think there's a lot more people that that are open to the concept of a huge hairy hominid, a whole population of them, than we thought there were. We thought there wouldn't be too many people that would believe in them, but as it turns out, there's a lot more people than the ones that don't believe. We have a website, Expedition Bigfoot, and then we also have a Facebook page where we post a lot of our stories, a lot of the witness encounters, the more interesting ones. We post them out there on our Facebook page, and along we share other researchers' findings as well out on our Facebook page.
Have you ever had an encounter yourself?
I have. I've had several. My wife and I saw two in a gentleman's property in Alva, Florida, back in 2010. We were there because he had called us and said he was having problems with one. And then I was bluff charged by one in the Green Swamp in 2013 when I was checking my cameras doing daytime wood knocks. And then my wife and I had one push a tree down at us in North Florida, not too far from Bluntstown, when we were again doing wood knocks in the middle of the day out in the forest. So those are my personal 3 encounters, but I've talked to probably 1,000 witnesses now that have had more incredible encounters than I have.
Last year, we went to the world's only Mothman Museum in Point Pleasant, West Virginia. If you're a watcher of this show, you should remember this excerpt from episode 3 of Cryptid Creatures, Mothman, the History and the Mystery. Here we are in Point Pleasant, West Virginia, at the convergence point of the Ohio and Kanawha rivers.
My name is Brittany Sayre. I'm from here in Point Pleasant. I've been working for the Mothman Museum officially about a little bit over a year, but I've been involved with Mothman since, well, pretty much my whole life, but essentially since 2010 because I was Miss Mothman Festival 2010. And then I also was Ms. in 2016. My boss, Jeff Walmsley, opened it up in 2005. It's grown into quite the thing, but it was really just something that, you know, it's our town's history. Jeff decided, hey, you know, let's try to get some people downtown. And they're like, hey, do you want to come work at the museum? I'm like, where do I sign? The last sighting of Mothman was actually in Chicago in around 2017. We haven't had any in Point Pleasant since 1967 after the bridge fell. Of course, you know, we get a lot of people who are like, oh, well, I think I saw the Mothman, but, you know, they're not recorded. We actually think that my pawpaw, or my grandpa, if you're not from the Appalachia area, he was in the National Guard when all this was going on, and it turns out that there were 2 National Guardsmen out in the woods in the TNT area working on a vehicle when all this was happening, and they saw this thing up in the trees. Well, we're pretty sure one of them was my pawpaw, because the other man that we have confirmed was the other National Guardsman was a guy that my pawpaw always had to work with. So we're pretty sure that he was one of them. And my mom can remember him coming home and being like, I saw this thing, and my nanny telling him not to talk about it because they think he was crazy. I definitely think there was something. There were too many people that, you know, we're pretty honest people around here, and especially back then, you know, people wouldn't make this up. If they were genuinely scared by something, they would definitely, you know, either be too scared to talk about it, and if they did talk about it, you knew that it was true. My personal thinking is that maybe there was a bird, like they've mentioned a sandhill crane or an owl or some kind of bird-like creature, maybe got into the water or ate a fish that was out of the water that may have had some kind of polluted chemical in it, and maybe mutated from there on out and grew into whatever this creature was. Where it is now, I don't know.
Many of the expeditions from cryptozoologists are self-funded and have to pay from their own pockets. So come and visit these museums and many others to help support the cause of cryptozoology. I hope you watch our next episode and have watched our previous ones. Cryptid Creatures is brought to you by the Kitty Petters Union, Cobble Sound Recording Company, and my dad's show, Meet the Pressers. This is Cryptid Creatures with Augie Macro, signing off.